It seems, of course, the late and brilliant monarch Queen Elizabeth II was, in fact, 100% correct. Nobody was truly going to be interested in Meghan Markle. Now, the Queen, had brilliant foresight. And think about this, chums, because if you think about it, the Queen, if you remember, said to Meghan, don't discard the career that you've built so hard. She was being very kind and very gracious. She said, you could stay in that lane if you wanted to do it. But apparently, if you remember, at that particular point, Meghan Markle said no, she didn't want to do that. She wanted to hit the ground running and become a true royal, a charity ambassador. We all know that was a tissue of lies, but of course the Queen had already very, very cleverly seen through it, right? And what was more interesting when you think about it is that Meghan could not have foreseen how those words would resonate with her, because in fact, if she'd have kept that particular door open, maybe with some, things that she could have done on the side, charitable associations, that sort of stuff, this whole direction, this whole disaster of Meghan, Spotify, Netflix, Lemonada, you name it, the whole catalyst of disaster could have been averted. I think the Queen truly knew that. But as ever, somebody's got to pay. And in Meghan's eyes already, even though she's picking up the pieces of this latest disaster, well, she's fighting back, well, alongside her husband, of course, with his, some might suggest, dwindling funds, allegedly. And these are the plans that so far they're coming up with. As ever, let me explain. Chums, welcome to a brand new episode of By Royal Appointment. And what a week it's been, right? I mean, literally, so we'll have a lovely wave. It's been a terrible week if you are Meghan Markle in many respects, but everybody could see this coming, As I told you the other day in an interview, though, not everything is lost. You see, when you're a royal, there's always a bit of star power. It doesn't really matter whether you've been a success or not. I mean, Prince Harry's, whatever it was, polo, was rubbish, I mean, it was just a rubbish idea backed up with a rubbish campaign. In fact, there was no campaign, was there? But of course, the people associated with polo, nachos and all that sort of stuff, they were lost in the ingulf of that, with Meghan forcing them to put out on Instagram all of those things. Do you remember? About jams and breakfast is delicious and it's all solved and all that. And you see, this is the problem. They're never directly in one lane. But of course, they're not business people. Meghan and Harry are simply props. They're celebrities, they're actors, whatever you want to call them. When Meghan went on those fake tours to Colombia and Nigeria, you could see that she was kind of getting bored very quickly, very soon. But this was apparently a life that she didn't want any part of because she wanted to do something else. If you cast your mind back even further, basically in the interview with Tom, I think it was, the guy from News at 10, and there was him and there was Oprah Winfrey, where basically Meghan announced that there was another way of having a life if it didn't fit you. And this really was the rhetoric that she rammed down Prince Harry's mind. Now, Harry had always been in two minds about staying within the royal family. He did believe there was another life, and there's nothing wrong in that. But he would never have pushed it this hard, this fast, or indeed this level of disaster. That was never going to be his remit. But now the problem is, of course, that Hollywood truly has quitted on Meghan and Harry. So where do they go next? You see, the problem that Meghan now has is, and this is where an issue that nobody's truly bothered to check in on, is that the agency, if you remember, William Morris Endeavour, they've remained steadfastly very, very quiet throughout this. You see, they're a big agency. And they thrive and have been successful for many, many decades, but they thrive on making sure that their clients are successful. You see, as an agency, you're only good as the success of the clients. Now, it would not be fair to say that when William Morris did some kind of loose deal with Meghan and Harry, that they were going to be phenomenally successful. They wanted Harry, they got Meghan. But of course, they threw a few dices and rolled it and see if this could work. It didn't. But what a lot of people haven't picked up on is the fact that actually, when you study it, they kept a very healthy distance away. It was very much Meghan's drive for the American Riviera orchard, and then that culminated in as ever. The only true deal, according to a very good source, that William Morris Endeavour actually got for Meghan and Harry was, well, for Meghan at least, was the Lemonada. And this was, of course, the female-backed podcasting company that Meghan apparently loved doing, but really never put the boot or the effort in that either, did she? And I think the writing was on the wall, in fact, for Lemonada, in fairness to them, because when you also look at it, truly, They took on archetypes, and nobody wanted to rewatch that. That should have been the first red flag. But they had to proceed ahead with it because, well, now they've done a deal. They didn't make a lot of money out of this, neither did Meghan Markle. There is no money to be made from female founders or flounders or whatever it's called. Now, I'm not relishing this downfall, whatever people might think. You know, I've been in this game a long time, and I know what it's like when, you know, the big gods, as it were, turn on you. It's very difficult. Nobody wants to be associated with a losing brand or indeed a losing company. And Archwell Productions is now, you know, tainted. But it was really tainted when you think about it. As far back as when Netflix decided they were suddenly now no longer going to do Pearl. You know, that again was a massive warning flag. Meet Me at the Lake, another warning flag. Nobody seemingly could get anything off the ground. Talking to people behind the scenes at Netflix, they said there was one major problem. And that problem was, in fact, Meghan Markle herself. She liked the sort of element of the business side of it, you know, the drawing of the contract and the idea, but didn't really want to execute the work. And this was the problem, not just with us ever, but with many other things too. Now, the issue that she also has is that she thoroughly blames, well, these two individuals for the killing of her brand and her career. Oh yes. The problem with Meghan and Harry, you know, is this, that both of them are not exactly dedicated to causes. If you remember earlier this year, Meghan Markle stood up at the Invictus Games in Canada, Whistler, I believe, and said, oh, you know, who was on the phone? Children apparently said, you know, to daddy all the time. And she said, oh, it's Invictus because that's all he works at. He works at it so hard. And you think, well, a little bit debatable, one might suggest, because really, if that's the only thing, then why take on all these other charities, which we allegedly found out with Senator Barley that he's not bothered with since, of course, he got married all those years ago. Seemingly, the things like Well Child, they're a once-a-year thing that is very good for him, his brand, if you like. And then the other things just seem very, very sketchy. Now, as I said, the problem that Meghan has, and this is the big, big issue, is the fact that, you know, she will never accept that this is her fault. You see, even if you saw the recent crepes that she put out on her Instagram, they looked absolutely disgusting. I mean, nobody in their right mind with food or whatever would want to put that sort of material out. But Meghan, you see, thinks there's nothing wrong with it. Why? Because she got rid of a social media manager, because consequently, allegedly, money's very tight and these things cost money. But you're either doing it or you're not, and you've gone through a lot of money and you've been given a lot of money. And in fairness to Netflix and indeed Spotify, they rammed as many staff as they could towards you. 80, you said yourself, Meghan, there was 80 people working on the Netflix show. So out of those 80 people, could you have not taken some guidance as to, well, what was required, if you like, to make something like this successful? You get the picture. Now, moving forward, there's a bigger problem, and this is the bigger problem, right? You see, now Meghan blames the fact that the real reason why the brand has literally fallen apart is all to do with the targeting of their relationship. You know, the man that she calls a fox, he's very handsome, etc. And I'm sure he is in Meghan's eyes. But it's the brand themselves. They both seem like whingers and full of toxicity. You know, people do not want to work with them. Hollywood quit on them simply because of two things, really. Their lack of dedication and hard work, and more importantly, their continued attacks on the British monarchy. Do not underestimate the power of the monarchy within the celebrity world. Even if you look right back in the years, as I've mentioned on numerous other videos, whether that be Lord Louis Mountbatten or indeed Marilyn Monroe meeting the Queen at a Royal Command performance, even Barbara Streisand in the 70s with now King Charles, you know, that was very helpful to those sort of premieres and those launches. By attacking that, you are literally wiping away the people that actually you need on board. Now, one of the biggest things that Meghan has cited as a problem for her was the, well, as she said, very ungallant Hollywood Reporter piece. Why does Hollywood keep quitting on Meghan and Harry? Well, they kept quitting on themselves. You see, the problem is when you tell lies on camera, the lies are there, you know. And Harry, again, basically told a lot of lies, even on that T-bus that he took with James Corden for the CBS show. It wasn't true. He knew it wasn't true. James just thought, well, I'm getting a good exclusive here, and that's what television's about. But you see, then it was all picked apart. and once again, you had a problem. Meghan suddenly decided to use her own podcast as her own sort of medical trade to let the world know that she had various problems during childbirth. The idea of this, according to the source that was working there, was that people would ease off her and suddenly say, look, this is just a mother in her 40s who had these problems, and shouldn't she be allowed to discuss them? But it's meant to be about business. And so consequently, everything reverted back to Meghan. Now, it wasn't just the Hollywood Reporter that really irked Meghan. Oh no. She blames also the Vanity Fair piece, if you remember, which came out in February of this year and was very damaging in many aspects. Not just because of the damaging effect of a big piece, which of course litigation has never been forthcoming, but the alleged story that Meghan's people were shopping around a divorce book. Now, that really interested Netflix, right? Truly did interest them, because consequently they're thinking, wow, that would be a money spinner, because they are a money spinning company. You see, what they did with Harry and Meghan, and this is a very kind thing that Netflix did, they got that docu-series out of them, which was the funding, if you like, of the other stuff. But the Heart of Invictus was never going to be an attention grabber, because again, Harry moaned on in that a little bit. So again, not very successful. The reason now has been cited behind the scenes of Netflix as why As Ever didn't take off. Meghan's idea is the fact that she had to pull the launch at the beginning of the year. She felt that this was a winter series, that with people watching it in dark days and looking for sunshine, that the way they'd filmed it in the Californian rented house would have cheered people up. All the fruit platters, drinking wine on a patio, celebrity friends. What people focused on, the fact was that Meghan decided to recall herself Meghan Sussex and berated her friend Mindy Kaling. Wherever you turn, there was a problem. Netflix are not taking any responsibility. And this is where, again, this gets really interesting, because apparently, according to a source who worked on there and is now left, they told me that, many people tried to intervene with Meghan and say, maybe you should do it a bit like this. But apparently this was what happened. It was almost like you were talking to somebody through fog. She would just take it in, didn't offer an opinion, and then carry on with what she was already doing. And you see, what she was doing wasn't working. There was no fun spontaneity. Everything looked contrived. Everything looked, bad. Of course, Meghan thought she had the ace up her sleeve when she decided to sit down in the kitchen with her procured chum, Gwyneth Paltrow, the Oscar-winning actress who decided for some reason to look like some 70s throwback with huge window frames on. And you think, not exactly the glamorous look that Meghan possibly was looking for. She sat there shoveling in a lump of pie in her mouth with a foot on the table. Again, not a great look. And almost saying to the media, look, you're trying to pit us against each other, you've got it wrong. Now what's interesting is Meghan has decided that she wants to do this with Netflix. So Meghan's big plan really moving forward is to do exactly what she's done before, and that is take charge. Well, take charge of what, some people might say? A failing brand, as it were. Well, is it really failing? Because in Meghan's eyes, she believes that she can breathe life back into it. Absolutely. Can I just say, by the way, chums, I'm just met a lovely couple here called Michael and Catherine, and their son, James Murray, is at Cowes this week. And they just wanted me to share that with you. You see, it's nice, isn't it? Absolutely. These are the wonderful people that you meet when you're around and about filming, not in a studio, you see. Wonderful, wonderful people that watch the show on a regular basis. So nice to meet you, Michael and Catherine, and good luck to James. Now let's get back to your royal appointment. Yes, Meghan, you see, apparently wants to do this. She wants to buy back or retain ownership of As Ever with Love Meghan. And this really does make perfect sense, and it's something that she didn't do with Oprah Winfrey. As I told you a while back, when she did the interview with Oprah, she did not keep the tapes. She didn't own them. Harpo Productions own that, and apparently there's around about 2.5 hours, 3 hours of footage. And that's problematic in itself, because clearly they can't release it without Meghan and Harry's signature, but nonetheless there's that thing hanging over them. And also, let me just get this out and clear, is that Polo also could be returned back to the ownership of Archwell Productions. Now, what they can do with that is try and sell that to another channel, perhaps somewhere around the world, and they could regroup money in that way. Equally, they could even put it out as a cinema release, as a second feature. And you might say, well, will that bring any money in? Well, it highlights the brand. You see, truly, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry thought there was going to be a long-running series attached to polo because they felt this was a super elite sport, very glamorous, set in beautiful sunshine, glamorous and good-looking people. And the idea really was to make it a little bit more like Dallas and Dynasty, you know, that type of thing. As I mentioned briefly before, Meghan really saw this particular TV series as something that was watchable in the winter. Now, we all know that there was never going to be a second series. I mean, that was true, right? But the problem that they had, and this is now the issue for Meghan and Harry moving forward, is no major brands came forward to be associated with, as ever, with Love Meghan. And by that, at this point, once you've rolled out the first series, it could be anything from the use of flour sprinkles, champagne, sauces, whatever. When you watch a TV show, look at the shelf behind you and you will see those brands with those things turned round and they will just be accidentally left. Whether that be an oven glove, an apron, the brand is prominent. It was very difficult to get brand association for this. And as we know, Meghan herself put out the details of the things that she was going to be hopefully selling. Not just the jam and the wine and all that sort of stuff, but she thought eventually, spatulas, cooking pots, pans. I mean, if you remember, she gave the crew a signed wooden spoon. I mean, nothing like being generous, is there? But you see, that's the issue of where she's at now. So what's the turning point next after this? Well, as I told you in a previous video, they are not totally locked out of this deal, despite everybody crowing. They would be open to a connection again at some point if they were willing to do a follow-up or some scandalous type story. There's money to be made if they want to be people advising on certain shows. Prince Harry's name on a TV show is still sellable. There's no two ways about it. It does help get some sort of focus. And he alone would not be the absolute turn-off. Meghan herself would be, sadly, at this point, but things could turn around. You see, if she'd have gone down more the beauty and hair and makeup route, it would have been very hard to pick a fault with it. You see, people forget that through the years, major celebrities from the likes of Sophia Loren, Linda Evans, and Joan Collins, they've all had a go at branding, right? Joan Collins launched her own makeup range, which started off with a flurry, but then sort of died off. Apparently the only people that truly liked Joan Collins' makeup, and again I have to say allegedly, were drag queens because it stayed on quite well. And again, I'm not being unkind, but you see how these things start off. Over here, a TV presenter, Dermot O'Leary, had his own aftershave in the leading store, Marks and Spencer's, but it clearly didn't take off because if it was selling, it would still be there today. So she's not unique in that fail, and I'm not defending, I'm just saying this is the difference. Now, the problem that you've got is if you've got such a huge following as Meghan and Harry have, with acres of global free press, they could have done so much. They should have done fun things to sell the show, like With Love Meghan t-shirts. They should have done spoof things online, TikTok associations. But apparently it was Harry's reticence to get involved. The final straw for Netflix, according to the source that was working on the program, really was the fact that Meghan threw away a major marketing opportunity. And that opportunity really was the twerking video, right? The baby mama video. You see, she just tossed it out. There was no planning on that. And of course, that created a major buzz. The thing that they could have done with that is stopped and put an ad in between of it for With Love Meghan, or had the logo on or something. That is marketing. But she tossed it aside. Now, of course, that's gone. So they're looking, what else have you got? And of course, the only things left that really are resonating with people with the slightest bit of interest are now the mystery children. The mystery children that she's dangled on occasions on her Instagram account. And even Netflix said, well, if you don't reveal them, people are going to get bored very quickly. But Meghan, as I said, has another plan. Heads are truly going to roll over at Netflix, Oh yes, without a doubt. And the problem that you have is the major cheese at Netflix, which is Ted Sarandos. Now, the problem for Ted is that he's stuck his neck out. Even as early as this year, he was still crowing about the fact that Meghan Markle could sell anything. And, at that point, you would have thought, wow, And if you remember, at that award show, he was ridiculed by people for literally signing somebody and wasting money. But he always thought, apparently, that Meghan was the true star, that, while Harry was reticent to get involved, Meghan eventually would pull it out the bag. Now, what's interesting, as I say, about the executive producer role of Meghan Markle is she wouldn't listen to anybody. She wouldn't take advice. She didn't understand when, it wasn't working. And consequently, she came to the table, if you like, with a very flimsy idea with not really any original recipes or indeed plots and ideas. I mean, obviously, people get influenced by whatever they see. And there were lots of similarities, for instance, to Pamela Anderson's cooking show and also another lady over here. But of course, cooking shows are very, very basic. Apparently, Meghan wanted to do something a little bit different. But the thing really that she tossed out, which was an idea presented to her right at the beginning, was to get a celebrity. They came on, said their favourite meal from childhood that they'd not had for years. Meghan made it with a slight twist, and then they would eat it while chatting about their life, their career, their products, whatever. And this really was the idea that could have worked, in my opinion. Because obviously, the two of them could have made the meal together. But no, Meghan wanted to be the one that I've made this for you. That's why I'm feeding you. Have a drink, And also Netflix were chucked out by the fact that she didn't want to cook it at home. They thought they were going to make it authentic inside this Montecito mansion. But Meghan claims there was an 80-man crew. And that's not true. But of course, they're not going to go ahead against that. Now, the other problem also that Meghan had was the fact that, this story came out from her team at the time, the one that's now being fired, that apparently Meghan could easily pick up £1 million for an influencer post. Now, that truly, whatever you think, chums, could have happened a while back. I know people, particularly in the celebrity world, that if they endorse something or they like a book or something like that, it does a lot in their favour. I'm not saying 1 million, but, it would have to be something. But seriously, they could have made money on the spin-offs. Somehow Meghan got that wrong by aligning herself to some sort of Shopify thing or something. And that was a disaster. And again, no discussion at all with Netflix. Nobody said that we're going down this route. Everything was a shock to them. It was a shock to them, for instance, that Meghan had decided to suddenly not do any more podcasting. And they said, don't confuse the two brands. We need to know when you want to do it. But Meghan's just ploughed on herself. Now, as I say, Ted Sarandos, strange guy, met him briefly. The thing is, I think he was completely and utterly, beguiled, enamoured. We've seen him at the Beyonce concerts, all of that sort of stuff. A very, very powerful figure in the entertainment world. But the one thing that you can't lose sight of is if the celebrity that you've booked, you've hired, you've spent money on, decides that they're going to turn and do things their own way. It doesn't work like that. Even at the height of his fame, Simon Cowell had bosses. I worked for Simon, as many of you know. And Simon was the #1 global star, all thanks to X Factor and Britain's Got Talent, America's Got Talent. But eventually, the ego has to be reined in. And what we're seeing now is that Simon's having another crack on a streaming giant because major networks can't afford to take on another idea from Simon. You see how this works. Now, Meghan, as I said, turned down the opportunity to do some sort of British publicity because she'd nailed herself into a corner. She couldn't return back, say, to appear on The One Show or ITV's This Morning and do a cook-off with their chef, which would have been very helpful in winning the audience over. Even a satellite link, no. The chat shows over in America, whether it be Jimmy Kimmel or whatever they are, she didn't want to do them. Now, they didn't know why, and it's interesting because according to that source, particularly in her agency, there were people interested. I would suggest that it's problematic for Meghan to be handled off the cuff. You see, everything that she does, she kind of knows in advance the questions. So if you pop up in a chat show and they suddenly say, talk me through, what do you think to Prince Harry getting that fake tattoo? If it's not agreed, she's not spontaneous. And so consequently, that is very eye-opening for the public to see, actually, she's not that good caught off guard. You see what I'm saying? Now, where this gets interesting moving forward is, according to the source that's currently working with her, Meghan believes she doesn't need these major giants, everybody's moving off to being independent and online. And so the idea at this moment, at the time of recording this, is that Meghan believes she could kickstart this literally by going directly maybe through Instagram, through YouTube, or even TikTok. She believes that this, when she did the deal 5 years ago, the world has moved on. But when you think about it, if you're going from one platform, say, to another, if you look at, say, somebody like who's been a Fox News host, but now is a very successful online news broadcaster, they have that platform from success. They could take it over. It's like the guy Tucker Carlson on X. He had that platform and took it to X. Meghan would be starting literally at rock bottom. Yes, you could say, well, she's got 3 million on Instagram. That's a good start. And it sure is. But are those people watching, or as the kids say, hate watching? And more importantly, are they watching with a view to buying, getting involved, or interacting? When you cut off your comments, that doesn't work either. So you see the problems now that you've got moving forward. It is very, very tricky at this moment in time. The saving grace, according to the sources, what Prince Harry's willing to do for Meghan Markle. And as she pointed out, that man loves me so much. But will he do this?